1958. A cold rain falls over Bentonville, Arkansas. Inside a modest home, lamplight flickers across a wooden table. Spread before a man in his 40s is a blueprint, rough pencil lines sketching the outline of a house. Not a mansion, not a monument to wealth. A simple ranch home, nestled into the Ozark forest. The man's name is Sam Walton. In 17 years, he will be worth over $25 billion. The richest man in America. An empire of stores stretching across the continent, employing hundreds of thousands, reshaping the very fabric of American retail. But tonight, he is not designing a palace. He is designing a fortress, a psychological fortress, a structure meant to protect his soul from the billions of dollars that are coming. Because Sam Walton understood something that most people who chase wealth never grasp. Money doesn't just change your bank account. It changes who you are. It corrupts. It isolates. It transforms. And the house he was planning that rainy night in 1958 was his answer to that threat. But here's the truth the elite don't want you to know. Behind those simple wooden walls, behind the refusal of luxury, behind the carefully crafted image of humility, there was a reality far more complex than the legend suggests. This is not a story about a billionaire who lived modestly. This is an investigation into the pathology of humility, into the psychology of a man who built an empire while refusing to live like an emperor, into the invisible machinery that made that lifestyle possible. If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the psychological lives of America's wealthiest families, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. We don't celebrate mansions, we investigate them. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand why Sam Walton's house in Bentonville was never about wood and stone. It was about survival. And in 1972, when fire consumed his first home, and he chose to live in a mobile trailer rather than rent a hotel suite, the world got a glimpse of just how deep that pathology ran. This is the dark secret of Sam Walton's 1958 house, and the investigation starts now. To understand the fortress, we first need to understand the Inferno that tested it, the fire that revealed whether Sam's humility was performance or pathology. April 1972. Bentonville, Arkansas, 3 in the morning. Sam Walton wakes to the smell of smoke. Within minutes, flames are tearing through the home he built 14 years earlier. The wooden structure, the Ozark limestone fireplace, the simple rooms where he raised his 4 children, all of it consumed. By dawn, the house is gone. Sam Walton stands in the ashes, 64 years old, worth an estimated $300 million, roughly $2 billion in today's money. He could buy any mansion in America. He could rent the presidential suite at the finest hotel in Arkansas while rebuilding. He doesn't. Instead, Sam Walton moves his family into a mobile home, a trailer, parked on the property where his house once stood, and he lives there for months. Neighbors watched in disbelief. Here was the founder of Walmart, a retail empire already spanning multiple states, living in a trailer like a construction worker between jobs. No hotel, no temporary luxury rental, a trailer. Some thought it was a publicity stunt, a billionaire playing poor to connect with his working-class customers. They were wrong. This wasn't performance. This was compulsion. Helen Walton, Sam's wife, later admitted in private letters that she pushed him to at least consider more comfortable temporary housing, not a mansion, just something reasonable while they rebuilt. Sam refused. He told her the trailer was adequate, that anything more would be wasteful, that the money could be better spent on the business, on employees, on expansion. But here's what the biographies don't tell you. The fire of 1972 wasn't a tragedy that interrupted Sam Walton's humble lifestyle. It was a stress test, a moment when the mask could have slipped, when a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, having lost his home, could have justified treating himself to basic comfort. He didn't. And that choice, that pathological rejection of comfort even in crisis, revealed something crucial. Sam's humility wasn't a marketing strategy. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't something he could turn off when the cameras weren't looking. It was who he was. Or, more accurately, who he had forced himself to become. The question is why? Why would a man with nearly infinite resources choose deprivation? What was he protecting himself from? What did he fear money would do to him if he let his guard down even once? The answer lies in the house he built to replace the one that burned, and in the architect he chose to design it. After the ashes cooled, Sam didn't hire a conventional architect. He sought out a man who understood something most builders didn't: how to hide wealth inside nature, how to make a fortress look like a home. His name was Fay Jones. Jones was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, a disciple of what's called organic architecture. The philosophy is simple but radical. A building shouldn't dominate nature. It should dissolve into it. It should feel like it grew from the ground, rather than being imposed upon it. For most wealthy clients, this philosophy was aesthetic, a way to make their mansions look artistic and sophisticated. For Sam Walton, it was something else entirely. It was camouflage. Let's examine the evidence. The materials Jones selected for the Walton house: Ozark limestone, not imported marble, not granite from Vermont. Limestone quarried from the same hills surrounding Bentonville. Stone that had been lying in those forests for millions of years. The wood? Native oak and pine, trees that grew within 20 miles of the construction site. No exotic hardwoods shipped from South America, no rare timber from the Pacific Northwest. The design itself? Low horizontal lines, a single-story ranch home that hugged the contours of the land. No towers, no grand columns, no circular driveway announcing wealth to anyone who approached. From the road, you could drive past the Walton property and think you were looking at an upscale park ranger's residence, not the home of the richest man in America. And that was precisely the point. Every choice was diagnostic. Every material selection was a symptom of Sam's pathology. He wasn't just building a house. He was constructing a psychological defense system against the corrupting influence of wealth. Jones later wrote in his architectural notes, housed now at the University of Arkansas, that Sam's only instruction was this: make it feel like it belongs here, like it's always been here, like money had nothing to do with it. The construction cost? Approximately $60,000 in 1973, roughly $420,000 in today's money. For context, other businessmen with a fraction of Sam's wealth were building homes costing millions, multi-story estates with gold fixtures, imported chandeliers, marble fountains. Sam Walton built what amounted to a very nice middle-class home, on land he owned outright, with materials sourced locally to keep costs down. But here's what the organic architecture concealed: the technical sophistication. Jones designed the house with geothermal heating and cooling systems years before they became common. Passive solar orientation. Natural ventilation that reduced energy costs. This wasn't poverty. This was engineered efficiency, disguised as simplicity. The Ozark limestone walls? They provided thermal mass, keeping the house cool in summer and winter without excessive mechanical systems. The native wood? It aged naturally, requiring less maintenance than exotic species. Sam wasn't rejecting comfort. He was rejecting waste. And he was using cutting-edge architectural technology to do it in a way that looked humble. The house became his prescription for staying grounded, architecture as medicine, organic design as a daily reminder that he came from these hills, from this dirt, from people who built with what they had rather than what they could afford. But the real test of his pathology wasn't in the walls. It was in the rooms, those walls enclosed. Step inside, and the psychological diagnosis becomes even clearer, because every room in this house was designed not for display, but for defense, starting with the heart of the home. The front door opens into a living room that would disappoint anyone expecting a billionaire's mansion. 1,200 square feet, large windows facing the Ozark forest, hardwood floors, the same native oak used in the exterior framing, and in the center of the main living space, an Ozark limestone fireplace. Not a decorative accent, the functional heart of the home. This is what Jones called the hearth room. In his architectural philosophy, the hearth represents gathering, family, authenticity. The fireplace that Sam and Helen chose wasn't ornate. No carved mantles depicting Greek myths. No imported Italian marble surrounds. Just native stone, hand-stacked by local masons who learned their craft from their fathers. Stone pulled from the same quarries that supplied courthouses and churches across northwest Arkansas for 100 years. The hearth was diagnostic, because this was the room where Sam Walton made some of the most important decisions in retail history. Not in a corner office in Manhattan. Not in a boardroom with leather chairs and oil paintings of dead presidents. On a couch facing a stone fireplace in a room that looked like it belonged to a successful small-town doctor. The furniture? Helen selected most of it from local stores, some pieces from their own Walmart locations. Comfortable, durable, middle class, the kind of furniture a teacher or a store manager might save up to buy. The walls? No original Picassos, no Rothkos, family photographs, pictures of the kids, a framed newspaper clipping from the opening of the first Walmart in Rogers, Arkansas. Let's be clear about what this room wasn't. It wasn't the living room of Henry Ford's estate, with its vaulted ceilings and imported tapestries. It wasn't J. Paul Getty's mansion, where guests sat on furniture once owned by French royalty. No gold, no marble, no statement. But here's what investigators found when they examined the architecture more closely. The window placement wasn't random. Jones positioned them to maximize natural light, reducing the need for electric lighting during the day. Passive solar design, calculated down to the angle of the sun during different seasons. The fireplace itself? Designed with a heat recovery system that captured warmth and circulated it through the house. Efficiency disguised as rustic charm. Even the floor plan reveals intentionality. The hearthroom flows directly into the kitchen. No formal separation, no servant's entrance. Helen could cook dinner while Sam sat by the fire reviewing sales reports, and they could talk across 20 feet of open space. This wasn't an accident of design. It was a rejection of the architecture of separation, the invisible walls that wealthy families build between themselves and the work that sustains them. Other CEOs in the 1970s had homes with separate wings, staff quarters hidden from view, formal dining rooms used twice a year, spaces designed to broadcast status to visitors. Sam's hearthroom broadcast something else. That comfort didn't require extravagance. That a house could be technically sophisticated without looking expensive. That the center of a home should be where the family actually lives, not where they perform for guests. The room cost approximately $8,000 to complete, including the custom fireplace, about $56,000 in today's money. For comparison, the living room renovation in Nelson Rockefeller's estate that same year cost over $200,000, $4 million in modern terms. Sam spent 1% of that. But the room that truly exposed his pathology wasn't where he relaxed. It was where Helen worked. Because if the hearthroom was about family integrity, the kitchen revealed something even more fundamental. A billionaire's wife who refused to outsource the most basic labor of domestic life. Walk through the hearthroom, past the limestone fireplace, and you enter the kitchen where Helen Walton prepared meals for one of the wealthiest families in America. 11 by 14 feet, standard residential appliances, Formica countertops, not granite or quartz. Oak cabinets built by a local carpenter in Bentonville, finished with a simple stain. No commercial-grade range imported from France. No wine refrigerator. No separate prep kitchen where staff could work out of sight. Helen Walton cooked here, herself, every night. For context, in 1973, when this kitchen was completed, Sam Walton's net worth had already exceeded $100 million. $800 million in today's terms. Nelson Rockefeller employed a full-time chef and kitchen staff of 4. Henry Ford's estate had separate kitchens for family meals and formal entertaining. J. Paul Getty never set foot in his own kitchen. Helen Walton made pot roast on Wednesdays. She cooked every night. This wasn't about inability to afford help. The Waltons employed staff for the Walmart offices, for property maintenance, for legal services. They understood the value of delegating. But Helen refused to delegate this. Why? According to her personal correspondence, archived at the Bentonville Historical Museum, she believed that eating together as a family, with food she prepared, was one of the last offenses against what she called the isolation of wealth. The kitchen became a laboratory for teaching deprivation. Not poverty, deprivation, the intentional withholding of luxury that was easily affordable. The appliances? Standard Sears models. The same refrigerator, stove, and dishwasher that a middle management Walmart employee might buy. Helen could have afforded appliances costing 10 times as much. She chose not to. The layout? Efficient, but unremarkable. A galley configuration that maximized workflow in a small space. Jones designed it with Helen's input, studying how she moved while preparing meals. No kitchen island, topped with Italian marble. No pot filler faucet above a professional range. No warming drawers or separate beverage stations. Just counters, cabinets, and appliances, arranged for one person to cook practical meals. But here's what the kitchen revealed about the architecture of Sam's pathology. This wasn't just Helen's preference, it was a shared conviction that the moment you stop cooking your own food, you've crossed a line. You've admitted that your time is too valuable for ordinary tasks, that you're fundamentally different from the people who work for you. Sam feared that admission. He feared it so deeply that he designed his house to make it architecturally difficult to employ live-in domestic staff. No servants, quarters, no separate entrance for staff, no back staircase or service corridors. If you wanted help in this house, they would have to walk through the front door, through the hearth room, past the family. Visible, acknowledged, equal. Most wealthy families design homes that hide the labor that sustains them. Sam designed a home that made hiding labor almost impossible. The kitchen cost approximately $4,000 to complete, $28,000 in today's money. The kitchen renovation in the Rockefeller estate that same year cost $80,000, $640,000 in modern terms. Helen's kitchen cost 4% of that. And in that kitchen, over pot roast and green beans, Sam made a decision that would prove his pathology extended beyond his home. It extended into his workspace. Because the room that truly diagnosed Sam Walton wasn't where he ate. It was where he worked. A space so deliberately stripped of executive privilege that visitors often mistook it for a storage room. Down a short hallway from the kitchen sat a room that was technically an office, but looked more like a study carved from a high school library. 10 by 12 feet. A wooden desk, nothing custom-made, purchased from an office supply catalog. A simple chair, shelves lined with binders, sales reports, financial statements, and books about retail management. No executive leather. No mahogany paneling. No photographs with presidents or celebrities on the walls. No nameplate. No throne. No distance. This was where Sam Walton ran a retail empire that by 1980 would employ over 20,000 people and generate hundreds of millions in annual revenue. From a room smaller than most people's master bedrooms. Let's examine what this space reveals. Start with what's absent. In 1975, the average Fortune 500 CEO office was approximately 400 square feet. Sam's home workspace was 120. Those CEO offices typically included separate seating areas for meetings, credenzas displaying awards and trophies, original artwork, and windows overlooking city skylines. Sam's office had one window. It faced the backyard. Trees. No skyline to survey. No empire to gaze upon from above. The desk itself is diagnostic. Sam used the same desk for over 20 years, bought it in 1960 for $75 from a Rogers, Arkansas furniture store, approximately $700 in today's money. When a journalist visited in 1983 and asked why the richest man in America worked at a desk that looked like it belonged to a small-town insurance agent, Sam's answer was simple. It holds papers just fine. But here's what the Workspace concealed beneath its simplicity. Organization systems that were sophisticated for their era. Filing cabinets color-coded by region and department. A proto-database on index cards tracking inventory turnover at every Walmart location. Sam wasn't technologically behind. He was aesthetically stripped down. The difference matters. He owned one of the first personal computers available to consumers in the mid-1970s, an Altair 8800. Used it to run basic sales projections, but he kept it on a folding table in the corner, not displayed as a status symbol of technological sophistication. For context, in 1945, when Sam borrowed $25,000 to buy his first general store, that represented roughly $430,000 in today's money, a significant sum, but not uncommon for a small business loan. By 1985, from this simple home office, he was overseeing a company worth billions. The Workspace was a prescription against executive disease. Sam had watched other businessmen transform as their companies grew, watched them move into corner offices on the 20th floor, watched them install oak-paneled walls and Persian rugs, watched them stop taking phone calls from store managers and start communicating only through layers of assistance. He watched them become unreachable, and he diagnosed the architecture as the carrier of the disease. The moment you accept the corner office with a view, you've accepted the distance that comes with it. So he designed a workspace that made distance impossible. A room so small that any meeting felt intimate. A desk so plain that no one could feel intimidated approaching it. Windows that showed trees instead of towers. This was architecture as inoculation. The office cost approximately $2,000 to furnish when completed in 1973, $14,000 in today's money. Compare that to the office renovation Lee Iacocca commissioned at Ford Motor Company headquarters in 1974, $50,000. $400,000 in modern terms. Sam's entire workspace cost 3.5% of Iacocca's office upgrade. But the pathology went deeper than just the office, because Sam did something in that workspace that revealed the true extent of his condition. He kept a ledger, a handwritten record of every significant personal expense from 1950 to 1985, not for tax purposes, for psychological purposes. Every entry included the cost and a one-sentence justification. Shoes, $42, old pair worn through. Dinner out, $18, Helen's birthday. New truck, $8,000, old one had 200,000 miles. A billionaire keeping a handwritten expense diary, justifying purchases to himself, as if money might still run out, as if thrift was still necessary for survival. This wasn't financial management. This was ritualized deprivation, a daily reminder, written in his own hand, that he was still the man who borrowed $20,000 in 1945, roughly $345,000 in today's money, and worried about making payments. The workspace diagnosed the condition. The ledger proved it was chronic. But here's what even the ledger couldn't reveal. The invisible machinery required to maintain this lifestyle. The army of workers whose labor made Sam's humility possible. Because there's a question no one asks about billionaire humility. Who does the work that the billionaire refuses to see? Who maintains the illusion of simplicity? The question no one asks. Who mowed the lawn? Sam Walton lived on 120 acres of Ozark forest. Rolling hills, native grasses, walking trails maintained through dense timber. Helen Walton developed those acres into what would become Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, a world-class institution requiring groundskeeping, landscaping, climate-controlled storage for artwork, security systems. Who did that work? Not Sam, not Helen, not their 4 children visiting on holidays. Let's conduct the audit, the labor audit that exposes the infrastructure beneath the humility. In 1980, property records from Benton County, Arkansas show the Walton estate employed between 8 and 12 full-time groundskeepers. Not gardeners in the traditional mansion sense. Maintenance workers. Men hired to keep the forest trails clear, manage erosion on the hillsides, maintain the natural landscaping that made the property look effortlessly wild. Their wages? Between $8 and $12 per hour. Roughly $30 to $45 per hour in today's money. That's $240 to $360 per day, per worker. For a crew of 10 workers, that's $2,400 to $3,600 daily. Over $800,000 to $1.3 million annually in modern terms. Just for groundskeeping. Someone mowed, someone repaired, someone maintained. The simple ranch house required upkeep too. The Ozark limestone needed periodic cleaning and repointing. The native oak floors needed refinishing every few years. The geothermal systems, the passive solar elements, the energy-efficient windows, all required specialized maintenance. Walmart employed facilities managers who supervised this work, not live-in staff. Contract workers who arrived, performed their jobs, and left, invisible by design. Sam could say, truthfully, that he didn't employ household servants, because he employed something more sophisticated, a facilities management system borrowed from his retail operations. Workers who maintained the property the same way Walmart maintained its stores, efficiently, invisibly, without personal attachment. But the real machinery wasn't at the house. It was 2 miles away, at Crystal Bridges. When the museum opened its initial buildings in the late 1980s, even before the full Crystal Bridges complex, it required staff, curators, security personnel, climate control technicians, restoration specialists. By 2011, when Crystal Bridges officially opened to the public after Sam's death, it employed over 45 full-time staff members. Today, that number exceeds 100. Guards monitoring galleries, technicians maintaining humidity levels that protect priceless paintings, groundskeepers managing the museum's architectural landscape, designed by the renowned architect Moshe Safdie. Helen Walton, who refused to hire kitchen help, employed an army to manage her cultural vision. The irony is diagnostic. The pathology required infrastructure. Sam's ledger showed him tracking every personal expense. But Walmart's corporate budget covered property maintenance, security systems, legal structures that protected the estate. The company paid for what the man refused to acknowledge. Let's examine specific positions. In 1985, Crystal Bridges preliminary operations employed 3 full-time security personnel. Annual salary approximately $28,000 each. Roughly $75,000 in today's money. Total annual cost, $225,000 modern dollars. 2 climate control specialists managing temperature and humidity for art storage. Salary approximately $32,000 annually, $85,000 in modern terms. Total, $170,000. 1 facilities manager coordinating all maintenance operations. Salary approximately $40,000. $107,000 today. 4 groundskeepers maintaining the museum property year-round. Salary approximately $18,000 each, $48,000 in modern dollars. Total, $192,000 annually. Just these positions alone cost the equivalent of $794,000 per year in today's money. And this was before the museum's full-scale development. The Walton Family Foundation, which funded Crystal Bridges, was capitalized with Walmart stock. The workers maintaining Helen's cultural legacy were paid, ultimately, by the same retail empire that allowed Sam to live simply at home. This is the invisible machinery that made humility possible. Compare this infrastructure to how other billionaires managed their estates in the 1980s. Nelson Rockefeller employed live-in staff who were visible, acknowledged, part of the household. Staff who ate separately, lived in separate quarters, but whose presence was admitted. Sam's system was more sophisticated. The labor existed but was organizationally distanced. Contractors, not employees. Facilities management, not household staff. Corporate budgets, not personal expenses. He could maintain the performance of simplicity because the complexity was outsourced to corporate structures. But here's what the labor audit reveals about the psychology. This wasn't hypocrisy. Sam genuinely believed he was living modestly because he measured his life against the wrong baseline. He compared his home to Rockefeller estates with 50 rooms and live-in staff of 20. Against that standard, his ranch house with contract maintenance looked humble. He didn't compare it to the homes of his Walmart store managers. Those families lived in genuine middle-class homes, 1,500 square feet in subdivisions. They mowed their own lawns, fixed their own fences. Their wives cooked in kitchens without expecting anyone else to clean up. That was the baseline Sam claimed to inhabit. But the labor audit proves otherwise. The pathology wasn't the simplicity of the house. It was the blindness to the machinery sustaining it. Sam could see the contractors as separate from his lifestyle because they didn't live with him. They didn't eat at his table. They weren't servants in the traditional sense. But they served. They made the humble life possible. They maintained the illusion that 120 acres of Ozark forest naturally stayed pristine. That museum-quality climate control systems ran themselves. That security for priceless art collections required no human presence. The invisible hands numbered in the dozens. By the time Crystal Bridges reached full operation, over 100 people worked to maintain what Helen had built beside Sam's simple home. And not one of them appeared in Sam's expense ledger. But the machinery didn't just serve Sam and Helen. It served a larger vision. Because what Helen built at Crystal Bridges wasn't just a museum. It was an answer to a question Sam never asked. What do you do with wealth if you refuse to enjoy it yourself? Helen Walton had an answer that Sam never articulated himself. You build something for strangers. Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art opened to the public in November 2011, 9 years after Sam's death. 120 acres of Ozark forest transformed into a world-class museum designed by Moshe Safdie. Natural light filtering through skylights onto paintings by Norman Rockwell, Georgia O'Keeffe, Andy Warhol, Jackson Pollock. Free admission. Forever. The construction cost? $180 million. Roughly $450 million in today's money. Helen Walton could have built a palace. Instead, she built a public institution in Bentonville, Arkansas, population 35,000 when construction began. A town that most Americans couldn't find on a map. And she made it free. This wasn't charity in the traditional billionaire sense. This was architecture as alternative pathology, a redirection of the disease rather than a cure. Sam's pathology was deprivation. Helen's was cultural compensation. Where Sam refused luxury for himself, Helen refused to keep beauty private. The museum sits 2 miles from the ranch house where Sam kept his expense ledger. You can walk the trail between them. From the simple home office where billions were managed to the architectural masterpiece where those billions were spent. Not for them, for strangers. Let's examine what this reveals. The Walton family could have followed the Rockefeller model. Build a private art collection, display it in the home, allow occasional public viewings by appointment, maintain control, preserve exclusivity. Helen rejected that model entirely. Crystal Bridges was designed from the beginning as radically accessible. No admission fees, No membership requirements, no donations expected at the door. Located not in New York or Los Angeles where the elite could visit conveniently, but in Arkansas, where Walmart employees and their families could walk through galleries on their days off. The architecture itself refuses elitism. Safdie designed the museum to blend into the landscape, using the same organic principles that Fay Jones applied to the Walton home. Buildings that emerge from the forest rather than dominating it. Copper roofs that will oxidize to green, camouflaging into the trees. Even the world-class art collection is housed in structures that look like they grew from the Ozark hills. This was Sam's pathology expressed through Helen's medium. Architecture that hides wealth. Beauty that refuses to broadcast its cost. But here's what the cultural legacy reveals about the family psychology. Helen understood something Sam never admitted, that deprivation alone wasn't sustainable, that billions of dollars accumulated from retail operations couldn't simply sit in investment accounts earning compound interest while the family lived in a ranch house eating pot roast. The money had to go somewhere. It had to mean something. Sam's answer was to keep accumulating, keep building Walmart stores, keep expanding the empire. Growth as purpose. Helen's answer was to convert money into culture, to take the billions generated by selling discount merchandise and use them to bring Georgia O'Keeffe to Arkansas, to give people who couldn't afford museum memberships in major cities free access to masterpieces. Crystal Bridges became the counter-argument to Sam's pathology, proof that the Walton fortune could serve a public good beyond job creation and low prices. The museum now attracts over 800,000 visitors annually. Art teachers bringing students from Oklahoma and Missouri. Families driving hours to see paintings they've only read about. Walmart employees on their lunch breaks walking through galleries that cost more to build than most small towns' annual budgets. And they pay nothing. This was architecture as redemption. Not redemption for Sam's business practices, not apology for Walmart's labor controversies. Redemption for the act of accumulation itself. Helen seemed to believe that if you gather billions, you owe those billions back to the public in a form that elevates rather than just employs. That art and culture are debts to be paid, not luxuries to hoard. Alice Walton, Sam and Helen's daughter, continued this vision. She donated her own art collection to Crystal Bridges. Pieces worth hundreds of millions, displayed for free, in a town of 35,000. The Walton women understood what Sam couldn't articulate, that pathological humility in private life requires pathological generosity in public legacy. But the question remains, was this generosity, or was it just another form of control? Another way to manage the corruption of wealth by redirecting it into structures that bear the family name? Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Walton Family Foundation, buildings and institutions that will outlast the people, broadcasting the family's values long after the simple ranch house crumbles. This wasn't pathology cured. This was pathology redirected, channeled into something that looked like public service, but still served the psychological need to control how the money was perceived. And that control, that need to manage the narrative of wealth, was the deepest pathology of all. Which brings us back to Sam, to the fundamental question this investigation was designed to answer. Was his humility authentic, or was it the most sophisticated performance of all? Let's answer the question directly. Was Sam Walton's humility authentic? Yes. Was it healthy? No. Here's the evidence. The 1972 fire. When Sam chose the trailer over the hotel, no cameras were present. No journalists documented it. This was before Walmart became a national story. Before Forbes ranked him as America's richest man. Before his lifestyle became part of the corporate legend. He made that choice when almost nobody was watching. That's not performance. That's compulsion. But let's address the objections. The skeptics who say this whole narrative is propaganda, that Sam was just a shrewd marketer who understood that appearing humble made him relatable to customers and employees. The objection has merit, Sam absolutely benefited from the perception of humility. Walmart's brand identity was built on it. Everyday low prices championed by an everyday CEO, a man who drove a pickup truck and lived modestly even as his stores spread across America. But here's what the architectural evidence reveals. The choices Sam made in his home weren't visible to customers. The Ozark limestone, the geothermal systems, the local materials, the simple furniture, these weren't advertised. No tours of his house, no magazine spreads showing his kitchen where Helen cooked. These choices weren't for public consumption. They were for private psychological defense. The pathology was real, and it ran deep. Let's examine where it came from. Sam Walton was born in 1918, came of age during the Great Depression. He watched men who had been wealthy lose everything, watched how sudden poverty destroyed not just their bank accounts but their identities, turned confident businessmen into broken, desperate men. The lesson Sam learned wasn't just save money for hard times. It was something more primal. Never become the kind of person who needs wealth to know who you are. The house was architecture as armor against identity death. If you build your sense of self on expensive things, luxury cars, mansions with gold fixtures, then losing those things destroys you. But if you build your identity on frugality, on making do with simple things, then no economic catastrophe can touch your core self. Sam designed his house to remind him daily who he was. A man from rural Oklahoma. A man who borrowed $20,000 and worried about making payments. A man whose worth was measured by work ethic and family values, not by square footage or imported marble. The pathology was using architecture to freeze that identity in place. Even as his wealth exploded into billions, the house kept him tethered to who he was in 1945. But this created the central contradiction, the invisible machinery. Sam wasn't a hypocrite in the traditional sense. He genuinely believed he lived simply. But he had a blind spot the size of crystal bridges. He couldn't see the labor sustaining his lifestyle because he'd convinced himself that contractors weren't the same as servants, that facilities management wasn't the same as household staff, that corporate budgets weren't the same as personal luxury. The pathology created the blindness. Because if he acknowledged the full infrastructure required to maintain his simple life, the whole psychological framework would collapse. He'd have to admit that his humility required privilege, that his deprivation was a choice made possible by enormous wealth, that he wasn't actually living like his store managers at all. So he didn't acknowledge it. Not consciously. The brain is very good at not seeing what would threaten its core beliefs about the self. This is what makes Sam's story different from simple hypocrisy. Hypocrites know they're performing. They cynically maintain one image while living another. Sam actually believed his own performance. He'd internalized it so deeply that it became authentic even as it remained pathological. Not performance, not fraud, pathology. Now, was this pathology harmful? That depends on your perspective. For Sam himself, arguably yes. He denied himself comforts that wouldn't have corrupted him. Refused air conditioning. Lived in a trailer after a fire when temporary luxury would have been reasonable. Maintained an expense ledger into his 70s, as if poverty might return at any moment. That's not healthy relationship with wealth. That's trauma response calcified into identity. For his family, mixed impact. His children inherited both vast wealth and a framework for managing it that emphasized public service over private luxury. Crystal Bridges exists because of that framework. But they also inherited the psychological burden of proving they weren't corrupted by money, the pressure to perform humility even in private. For his employees, complicated legacy. Sam's pathology translated into Walmart's obsession with cost-cutting. Efficiency taken to extremes. Wages kept low because we're all in this together, living simply. The benevolent paternalism that says, I don't live large, so you shouldn't expect to either. The pathology scaled. And when pathology scales from one man's house to a corporation employing millions, the consequences multiply. But here's what we can say with certainty. Based on the architectural evidence, the labor audit, the financial forensics, Sam Walton was neither a saint nor a fraud. He was a man who experienced trauma during the Depression, developed a pathological fear of wealth's corrupting power, and built a house that would protect him from that corruption. The house worked. It kept him grounded in a specific identity even as his fortune grew beyond comprehension. But the cost was blindness, inability to see the invisible machinery, inability to acknowledge that humility at his scale required infrastructure. That simplicity for a billionaire is fundamentally different from simplicity for the working class he claimed kinship with. The house was a fortress that protected his soul. But fortresses, by design, have limited visibility. You can't see what's happening outside the walls. And what was happening outside those walls, in the labor force maintaining his property, in the corporate structures funding his lifestyle, in the cultural institutions bearing his family name, was far more complex than the simple narrative Sam told himself. This is what architecture as pathology means. The building wasn't just shelter, it was psychological infrastructure. A physical system designed to maintain a specific self-concept against the corrupting pressure of billions. It worked. Sam Walton died believing he'd lived simply, believing he'd resisted the disease that destroys other billionaires. But the investigation reveals otherwise. He didn't resist the disease. He just built better camouflage for it. The ranch house in Bentonville wasn't a rejection of wealth. It was wealth's most sophisticated disguise. Which leaves one final question. What does this house, this life, this pathology, tell us about the possibility of ethical wealth? Can billions be accumulated and deployed without corruption? Or is Sam's story just proof that even the most disciplined humility is ultimately self-deception? The house still stands in Bentonville, 120 acres of Ozark forest, a simple ranch home designed by Fay Jones. Limestone from local quarries, wood from native trees. Simple house, complex truth. We set out to investigate the dark secret of Sam Walton's 1958 house, the psychological fortress, the architecture of pathological humility. What we found was this: Sam Walton succeeded in his mission. He built a home that protected his identity from the corrupting power of billions. He lived and died believing he'd resisted the disease that destroys other wealthy men. But the investigation revealed the cost, the invisible machinery, the blind spots, the sophistication required to maintain simplicity at that scale. Whether that makes him admirable or tragic is for you to decide. What we can say with certainty is that his house wasn't just a building, it was a diagnosis. Architecture as pathology, a physical structure designed to manage psychological disease. And in that sense, every billionaire needs a fortress. Sam's was made of Ozark limestone and native oak. Others build theirs from different materials. But the function is the same: protection against what wealth does to the soul. If you enjoyed this deep investigation into architecture and the psychology of America's wealthiest families, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. We don't celebrate mansions, we investigate them. Because the stories these buildings tell are never simple, and the truth is always more complicated than the legend. The investigation continues,